morning. It is November 9th, coming to you live from Seoul. We start with the stories making the headlines at this hour. Israeli forces say Hamas has lost control of Northern Gaza, where Israel continues targeting Hamas's tunnels. Meanwhile, Israel says it has no plans to reoccupy Gaza after the war, as the U.S. once again warns against Israel's reoccupation. President Yoon will be heading to San Francisco next week to attend the APEC summit. On the sidelines, the South Korean president and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida are expected to give a joint lecture at Stanford University. More trips to Europe are also scheduled. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has arrived in South Korea. He's set to meet with his South Korean counterpart Park Jin and President Yoon Suk-yeol, with Russia and North Korea's arms cooperation among the topics to be discussed. Israel forces say Hamas has lost control of northern Gaza, prompting thousands of Palestinians to flee. As they press on with their offensive targeting Hamas's tunnels, the U.S. continues to seek a humanitarian pause for hostages to be released. Lee Seung-jae has more.
According to Israel's military spokesperson, Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari, during a televised briefing on Wednesday, Hamas has lost control of northern Gaza as thousands of Gazans have moved south. The spokesperson said some 50,000 Palestinians moved from the northern Gaza Strip to the south, adding that they're moving because they understand that Hamas has lost control in the north. While Hagari reiterated the government's stance that there will be no ceasefire, he said Israel has been allowing humanitarian pauses at specific times to allow Gazans to relocate south. In a press release also on Wednesday, the Israel Defense Forces claimed it had destroyed 130 Hamas tunnel shafts as it continues with its air and ground operations in Gaza. According to the statement, combat engineers fighting in Gaza are destroying Hamas's weapons and are locating, exposing, and detonating tunnel shafts. Meanwhile, the U.S. is closely discussing with Israel and Qatar a proposal for a pause in fighting in Gaza of up to 3 days, which will allow the delivery of more humanitarian aid and the possible release of some hostages held by Hamas. While Israel has made it clear that a humanitarian ceasefire would only come if the Palestinian militant group releases all 240 hostages, a senior Arab source familiar with the discussions said there was hope that a deal could still be reached, adding that the parties involved are at a critical stage of the negotiations. A diplomat briefed on the matter said that a pause of 1 to 3 days could allow the release of 10 to 15 hostages and also give Hamas time to gather information of the identities and locations of all the hostages in order to secure the release of dozens more. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, there is growing attention on who will govern Gaza after the war. Israel says it has no plans to reoccupy Gaza, as the U.S. once again warns against Israel's reoccupation. Our Choi Soo-hyung reports.
The U.S. State Secretary Antony Blinken on Wednesday local time said that Gaza cannot be occupied by Israel again. At a news conference after his G7 foreign ministers meeting in Tokyo, he also added that it's clear that authority over the governance of the Gaza Strip should be run by Palestine residents.
When it comes to post-conflict governance in Gaza, a few things are clear and necessary. One, Gaza cannot be continue to be run by Hamas. That simply invites a repetition of October 7th, and Gaza used as a place from which to launch terrorist attacks. It's also clear that Israel cannot occupy Gaza.
On Tuesday, Washington once again warned against Israel's reoccupation of Gaza following Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's comments that Israel will have indefinite overall security responsibility for the Gaza Strip. U.S. National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby also said it's quite possible for the Israeli military to remain in the Gaza Strip for a while after the war for follow-up measures, but the U.S. is firmly against a long-term reoccupation. On the same day, Reuters reported that Israel has no plans to reoccupy the Gaza Strip. An unnamed senior Israeli official stated that Israel has no intention of reoccupying or governing Gaza for an extended period. Furthermore, Israel emphasized that the ongoing operations in the Gaza Strip are effective and will continue, and they are not open-ended. Israel clarified that its military involvement is aimed at dismantling Hamas's terrorism and threats, but even after the military operations are complete, there will be a need for gradual measures against Hamas infrastructure. The Israeli government also said it's too early to talk about the next step scenarios for governance of the Gaza Strip, and their current operation is focusing on completely eradicating Hamas. Choi Soo-hyung, Arirang News.
President Yoon will be heading to San Francisco next week to attend the APEC summit. There he is expected to give a joint lecture with Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida at Stanford University. More trips to Europe are also scheduled. Our top office correspondent Oh Soo-young has the details.
President Yoon aims to increase host economic security and high-tech partnerships with like-minded countries, engaging in multilateral summitry in the United States and state visits to Europe. Yoon's office on Wednesday announced the President and the First Lady's upcoming trips, starting with the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit. Arriving in San Francisco on November 15th, Yoon will attend the official APEC sessions from the next day, laying out South Korea's role in global cooperation to make the green transition and support countries vulnerable to climate change. He'll also emphasize the need for multilateral efforts to strengthen supply chains and establish digital ethical standards amid the rapid evolution of artificial intelligence. The leader will also hold bilateral talks on the sidelines and engage with the local Korean community, as well as young people in high-tech industries. Japanese media reported that Yoon and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida are likely to hold a summit, with their officers currently in talks to arrange a joint lecture by the leaders at Stanford University. After returning to Seoul for the weekend, the first couple will head to London for a state visit, the first to be extended by King Charles III upon 140 years of bilateral relations. On November 21st, Yoon will attend official royal engagements, observing a guard of honour and a carriage progression to Buckingham Palace to meet King Charles at a welcoming ceremony and luncheon. The South Korean leader will then pay his respects to Korean war veterans and at the Tomb of the Unknown at Westminster Abbey before delivering a speech at Parliament to set out the future of bilateral ties. Heading to number 10 Downing Street the next day, Yoon will hold a summit with Prime Minister Rishi Sunak as the two sides produce the South Korea-UK Accord. They will set out to strengthen their strategic partnership in trade, IT, cybersecurity, weapons, space and green industries, among other key areas. Crossing over the English Channel to France, Yoon will continue his appeal for South Korea's coastal city of Busan to host the 2030 World Expo ahead of the decisive vote by member countries later this month in Paris. Marking his final overseas diplomacy of the year, Yoon will head to the Netherlands in mid-December, marking his first state visit to the country by a South Korean leader. During his two-day stay, he's expected to engage with the Dutch royal family, government at The Hague, as well as key businesses in high-tech areas.
President Yoon's diplomatic streak comes against the backdrop of the growing U.S.-China rivalry, the ongoing war in Ukraine and the Israel-Hamas conflict, making his multilateral engagements all the more crucial amid efforts for global and economic security as Seoul looks to act as a global pivotal state.
The APEC summit will be a chance to strengthen South Korea's diplomacy as a responsible player in the global community, while the state visit to the UK aims to strengthen strategic cooperation, particularly with key friendly nations. President Yoon has assigned Seoul with the responsibility and role of contributing to world freedom, peace and prosperity whilst attending the NATO, ASEAN and G20 summits and the UN General Assembly earlier this year.
Yoon has held over 140 summits so far this year, with at least 93 nations, according to the top office. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has arrived in South Korea. This comes at a time when North Korea and Russia appear to be deepening military ties. He arrived at the Ulsan Air Base at around 9:30 p.m. on Wednesday after taking part in a G7 foreign ministers meeting in Tokyo. Later on Thursday, the top U.S. diplomat is scheduled to meet with President Yoon and hold a meeting with his South Korean counterpart, Park Jin. Measures to prevent further North Korean arms cooperation with Russia is expected to top the agenda, as well as ways to strengthen security and economic cooperation between Seoul and Washington. This is the first time in more than two and a half years that Blinken has visited Seoul. The latest report by the Korea Development Institute gave mixed prospects for South Korea's economy and that it sees both recovery and challenges. Against this backdrop, the KDI will announce its economic outlook for the second half of the year today. To discuss its latest assessment, we're joined by Lee Seo-hyun, assistant professor from KDI School of Public Policy Management. Welcome to the show.
Hi, good morning.
Well, Professor, again, the latest prospect for September was mixed. Well, let's first talk about the optimistic side. What was the major factor you would say leading to the economic recovery?
Yes, indeed, various economic indicators are showing some signs of recovery. Industrial production year-over-year growth rate was up by 1.5 percentage points, led by semiconductor sector and as well as primary metals. The service sector has shown modest growth supported by the tourism sector that is gradually returning to normal after the COVID pandemic. And the construction sector remains strong in terms of the value of construction completed. And looking at the external sector as well, the latest trade data indicate improving signs of export. In October, export actually rose for the first time in 13 months as export to the U.S. rose.
Well, the KDI has been noting signs of recovery for the past few months now. It seems like the latest report has enhanced that view. Would you say that the country has hit its lowest point and that its recovery is picking up pace?
Yes, as a technology cycle is expected to turn the corner, the growth is likely to improve in the second half of the year. In the medium term as well, the real GDP growth will be just over 2%, and the recovery appears relatively resilient. And the risk to the economic outlook actually tilted to the downside, but compared to a couple of months ago, it is more balanced.
Well, despite all this, the report did maintain the stance that the country faces external uncertainties, as you have mentioned just now. What kind of challenges are we talking about exactly here?
One of the key downside risks is more persistent global inflation and the need to tighten monetary policy further for many of the advanced economies as well as South Korea. Global interest rate could remain higher for longer, and this may have implications for South Korean financial stability, especially with a very high level of household debt among, housing market downturn. And also there's another factor that could actually affect the, economic outlook, which is a weaker boost from China's economy due to a deeper downturn in the property sector in China. China remains as one of the biggest trade partner with South Korea, so it may have some implications for South Korean economic growth in the short term and medium term. Apart from this, we have also very heightened geopolitical risks, and its impact on the oil prices and supply chain could also impact South Korean economic recovery in the negative way.
Okay, now amid the good and bad aspects, the KDI is set to release its economic outlook for the second half of the year later today. What are we expecting?
I think as we have discussed just now, we have seen a lot of positive signs of recovery, in September and in October. So I think growth is likely to improve in the second half of the year, and we could expect some of this message from KDI as well. However, the economic outlook is, as we discussed, subject to high degree of uncertainty stemming from external sector. So I think, going forward, restrictive stance for monetary and fiscal policy in Korea to counter, the high inflation, that would also be needed for the remaining. Once we see some sign of, reduction in the inflation.
All right, Professor, thank you for your insight today.
Okay, thank you.
Unionized workers of Seoul Metro, the operator of Seoul's subway lines 1 to 9, began a 2-day strike on Thursday with reduced service provided outside of rush hour. The unionized workers are on strike from Thursday at 9 a.m. until Friday at 6 p.m. to protest the company's manpower reduction plan. The strike comes as Seoul Metro's management and the union failed to reach a deal during last-minute talks on Wednesday. Talks were suspended just 2 minutes into the meeting, which was followed by an announcement that the two sides had failed to reach a deal. South Korea's biggest startup festival, ComeUp 2023, is underway. More than half the participating startups came from overseas, providing a networking platform for domestic startups seeking to go global. Our Lee Soo-jin has more.
South Korea is ready for its startups to make their mark. The country's biggest startup festival, ComeUp 2023, which will be held across 3 days, kicked off on Wednesday under the slogan, "We Move the World." Now in its 5th year, ComeUp, hosted by the Ministry of SMEs and Startups, is focusing on helping startups expand into global markets and providing them with various business opportunities. For the first time ever, most of the participating startups, 60% in fact, are from overseas. Continuing the global networking drive that began with President Yoon's state visit to the Middle East, global startups from 35 countries will be in attendance, including a 180-member delegation from Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. To accommodate them all, there's a separate global zone set up, a new addition for this year. It stages company booths and country pavilions allow domestic startups to network and pitch to companies and officials from across the world. This year's ComeUp also features select local startups from various stages of development, giving them a platform to showcase their products. The festival also provides them with various opportunities for mentorship, networking, and investment. Arirang News sat down with the Minister of SMEs and Startups. She told us that this festival will highlight the strengths of South Korean startups.
South Korean startups are being recognized for their superior technology. For instance, in this year's CES, a quarter of the Innovation Award honorees were South Korean startups. In a digital era where new technology and businesses are needed, South Korean startups are already garnering much attention.
Also, this year's festival provides opportunities for startups to win what they need the most: capital.
At this year's ComeUp, there are 160 venture capitals from both Korea and abroad in attendance.
The minister added that she hopes that this festival will pave the way for more local startups to expand their business internationally, which will also help avoid business competition in the domestic market. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
Good morning, I'm Kim Seong, and we now turn over to stories from around the world. We begin in the U.S., where on Tuesday, voters headed to the polls to decide state initiatives and referendums during off-year elections. The night delivered some historic wins, including a pro-choice victory in Ohio. Ohio voters approved a constitutional amendment that will enshrine access to abortion in state law. In the nation's only race to include abortion on the ballot, it became the 7th state to guarantee abortion access, considered a considerable victory since the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade last year. And Ohio also became the 24th state in the U.S. to legalize marijuana for recreational use. The results, which also include Virginia's Democratic governor staying in office, as well as the Democrats taking full control of Kentucky's State House, are good news for Democrats amid poor approval numbers for President Joe Biden. Now moving over to Asia, where Malaysia's leader, Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim, told Parliament on Tuesday that Malaysians should unanimously back the Palestine cause, including maintaining ties with the militant group Hamas. On Tuesday parliamentary session, the Prime Minister's reaffirmation of his support for Palestine came as a response to a proposal by the U.S. to sanction Hamas and Palestine Islamic Jihad's foreign supporters. He also urged media outlets to avoid describing Hamas fighters as militants, saying Hamas holds the same values as Nelson Mandela's African National Congress, which fought against apartheid in South Africa. Malaysia, a Muslim-majority nation, does not recognize Israel as a country and has maintained the position that no diplomatic relations will commence until a two-state solution for Israel and Palestine is secured. Staying in Asia and to Indonesia, where former Communication and Information Technology Minister Johnny G. Plate has been sentenced to 15 years by the country's anti-graft court on Wednesday. The former cabinet minister was found guilty of corruption linked to the construction of mobile and internet transmission towers in rural parts of Indonesia. He was fined around $64,000 and ordered to reimburse the country for its losses to the tune of around $1 million. Prosecutors alleged that from a $533 million procurement project, the ex-minister pocketed around $1.2 million by turning a blind eye to feasibility studies on construction sites. Plate is the fifth former minister from President Joko Widodo's administration to have been sentenced for corruption. King Charles III, Britain's reigning monarch, got a taste of Korea as he visited Europe's largest Koreatown on Wednesday. In the first official visit by a royal member of the royal family, the visit follows a special mention of Korean President Yoon's state visit in the King's speech on Tuesday. Home to the largest population of Koreans in Europe, New Malden residents prepared a celebration of Korean food and culture, including traditional attire, hanbok, as well as putting on performances for the king. Year 2023 marks the 140th years of bilateral relations between the two nations.
Good morning. The early winter chill is taking a short break today before returning with colder air tomorrow. Morning temperatures are 3 to 5 degrees higher than yesterday in most places, with warmer highs today. Then sub-zero morning temperatures await us this weekend. As much as we wish we could enjoy today's warm temperatures, perhaps the warmest we'll have in a while, it's going to be rather cloudy with rain. Rain starts from central regions this afternoon, gradually spreading to the southern parts of the country and Jeju Island by tonight. Jeju could see up to 50 millimeters. The rest of the country could see 5 to 30 millimeters into Friday. Meanwhile, those in Gyeongsangdo provinces and surrounding areas could enjoy sunnier skies during the day, so please do so if you can, with highs going into the 20s this afternoon. Meanwhile, Seoul tops out at 17 degrees this afternoon. Looking ahead to next week, don't worry, we are not skipping right into the winter. Things will warm up by the middle of next week. Well, that's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
That is all for today. Thanks for watching.